The studio lights were bright, almost blinding as the cameras panned across the set of The View. The audience was buzzing with anticipation. Today's guest was none other than Elon Musk, the man who seemed to live in headlines as much as he lived on Earth. He was there to talk about his latest projects, sending rockets to space, revolutionizing electric cars, and reshaping social media. It sounded like a dream episode for any talk show, but no one could have guessed how quickly things would go off the rails. When Elon walked onto the stage, the energy shifted. His entrance was met with applause, though it wasn't overwhelming. Some people clapped out of admiration for his achievements. Others just wanted to see what kind of sparks he'd ignite. As he took his seat, you could tell he was ready for the spotlight. Dressed casually in a black jacket and jeans, he looked relaxed, maybe even a little smug. But there was one person on the panel who didn't seem impressed at all. Jasmine Crockett, the newest addition to the show. Jasmine had only been part of The View for a short time, but she was already making waves. Known for her sharp mind and bold opinions, she wasn't afraid to challenge anyone, regardless of their status or reputation. During rehearsals earlier that day, she made it clear she wasn't going to sugarcoat her questions for Elon. "If I'm here to ask tough questions," she told the producers, "then that's exactly what I'm going to do." Her confidence caught everyone's attention, including Elon's. When they briefly crossed paths backstage, their eyes locked for a moment, a silent acknowledgement that this wouldn't be an ordinary interview. As the show began, Whoopi Goldberg kicked things off with her usual charm. She introduced Elon warmly, listing some of his accomplishments while also teasing the controversies that always seemed to follow him around. The audience chuckled when she joked about how Elon probably dreamed of Mars more often than his own bed. For the first few minutes, everything went smoothly. Elon shared stories about growing up in South Africa, his early struggles as an entrepreneur, and his vision for the future of humanity. He even cracked a joke about how hard it is to find good Wi-Fi on another planet. The crowd laughed, and for a moment it felt like just another entertaining episode of The View. But behind the smiles and polite nods, something was brewing. Jasmine sat quietly, listening intently as Elon spoke. She scribbled notes on her notepad, occasionally glancing up at him with a look that said, "Your turn is coming." The other hosts tried to keep the conversation light, steering clear of anything too controversial. But Jasmine wasn't interested in small talk. She was there to dig deeper, to hold someone accountable who rarely faced pushback in public forums. When it was finally her turn to speak, the room seemed to hold its breath. Jasmine leaned forward slightly, her expression serious but calm. "Elon," she started, her voice steady and deliberate, "you've accomplished incredible things, but your companies have also faced criticism. There are accusations of worker exploitation, environmental concerns, and questions about your leadership style. How do you address those issues?" You could hear a pin drop. The light-hearted vibe vanished instantly, replaced by an electric tension that crackled through the air. Elon paused for a moment, clearly caught off guard by the directness of the question. He recovered quickly, though, flashing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Well," he said, leaning back in his chair, "I think it's important to focus on the positives. We're creating jobs, advancing technology, and working toward a better future for everyone." It was a classic deflection, the kind of answer that sounded polished but didn't really address the heart of the matter. Jasmine wasn't satisfied. "That's great," she replied, her tone firm but respectful. "But let's not ignore the negatives. Your companies have faced lawsuits over workplace conditions, and there are reports of employees being overworked and underpaid. Do you think these allegations deserve attention?" The audience stirred uncomfortably. This wasn't the friendly chat they had expected. It was starting to feel more like a courtroom cross-examination. Elon's jaw tightened, ever so slightly. He glanced at the other hosts, perhaps hoping for a lifeline, but they stayed silent. "Look," he said, his voice tinged with frustration. "Running businesses as complex as mine comes with challenges. Not every decision will please everyone, but the overall impact we're having is overwhelmingly positive." Jasmine nodded slowly, as if considering his response. Then she leaned in again, her next words hitting like a punch. "So you're saying the ends justify the means? That as long as you're pushing humanity forward, It doesn't matter if people get hurt along the way? The question hung in the air, heavy and loaded. The audience murmured among themselves, sensing that this was only the beginning of something bigger. For a brief moment, Elon looked unsure of how to respond. But then he straightened up, his trademark confidence returning. "What I'm saying," he shot back, his voice rising slightly, "is that progress requires sacrifice. If we waited for perfection, nothing would ever get done." The room fell silent again, the weight of his words sinking in. Jasmine stared at him, her expression unreadable. Whatever came next, it was clear that this conversation was far from over, and just like that, the stage was set for a showdown unlike anything The View had ever seen. The tension in the studio was thick enough to cut with a knife. After Elon's last remark about progress requiring sacrifice, Jasmine didn't miss a beat. She leaned forward again, her eyes locked onto his, as if daring him to explain himself further. "Sacrifice?" she echoed, her tone sharp but controlled. "Are you talking about the sacrifices made by your employees? The ones who've spoken out about grueling hours, low pay, and unsafe working conditions? Is that the kind of sacrifice you're referring to?" Elon shifted in his seat, clearly uncomfortable now. He wasn't used to being challenged this directly, especially on live television. Most interviews he did were either friendly puff pieces or carefully moderated discussions where tough questions were softened before they reached him. But Jasmine wasn't playing by those rules. She was here to hold him accountable, and she wasn't backing down. "Well," Elon began, his voice firmer this time, "running large-scale operations like Tesla and SpaceX isn't easy. We're dealing with cutting-edge technology, tight deadlines, and immense pressure to deliver results. Yes, there are challenges, but we're also creating thousands of jobs and pushing the boundaries of what humanity can achieve." Jasmine raised an eyebrow, her skepticism evident. "Creating jobs is great," she said, pausing for effect. "But what good are those jobs if the people doing them feel exploited? There have been reports of workers fainting on assembly lines because of extreme heat and exhaustion. Some say they're afraid to even take bathroom breaks. Does that sound like progress to you?" The audience gasped audibly. A few people murmured among themselves, while others sat frozen, completely absorbed in the exchange. This wasn't just entertainment anymore. It felt raw, real, and deeply personal. For many watching at home, these weren't abstract issues. They were reflections of struggles faced by countless workers across industries. Elon's face hardened. He wasn't used to being painted as the villain, and it showed. "Those reports are exaggerated," he shot back, his voice rising slightly. "We take worker safety seriously. Of course, no system is perfect, but we're constantly improving. And let's not forget, the work we're doing is changing the world. Electric cars, renewable energy, space exploration, these aren't small achievements." Jasmine nodded slowly, almost mockingly. "I'm not denying your accomplishments," she said, her tone calm but pointed. "But does success excuse mistreatment? You talk about changing the world, but shouldn't that change start with how you treat the people helping you build it?" The other hosts exchanged uneasy glances. Joy, Sunny, and Abby all seemed torn between stepping in to diffuse the situation and letting the debate unfold naturally. Whoopi, ever the mediator, tried to interject gently. "Let's remember, folks, this is a conversation, not a courtroom," she said with a nervous laugh. But neither Elon nor Jasmine seemed interested in easing off the gas. Elon leaned forward now, mirroring Jasmine's posture. "Look," he said, his frustration bubbling closer to the surface. "If you want to focus on negativity, fine. But I'd rather spend my time talking about solutions. Criticism without action doesn't help anyone." Jasmine tilted her head, unimpressed. "And I'd rather focus on accountability," she countered. "Because without accountability, there's no incentive to improve. If leaders like you aren't held responsible for their actions, then nothing changes." At this point, the audience was fully invested. Some clapped softly after Jasmine's retort, while others whispered nervously to their neighbors. This wasn't the usual scripted banter they were used to seeing on morning shows. It was messy, passionate, and unpredictable. And That's exactly what made it so compelling. Elon sighed, running a hand through his hair. For the first time, he looked genuinely flustered. You know, he said, his voice tinged with irritation, it's easy to criticize from the sidelines. But actually building something, taking risks, making hard decisions, that's where the real work happens. And trust me, it's not pretty. Jasmine didn't blink. I'm not criticizing from the sidelines, she replied sharply. I'm asking questions based on facts. Facts that matter to the people affected by your decisions. People who don't have billions of dollars or private jets to fall back on. The room grew quieter, the weight of her words sinking in. Even Elon seemed momentarily stunned. He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, as if unsure of what to say next. For someone who prided himself on quick thinking and clever comebacks, this was unfamiliar territory. Whoopi seized the moment to try steering the conversation back on track. Okay, she said, raising her hand slightly. Let's take a step back. Elon, maybe you could share some examples of how you're addressing these concerns. And Jasmine, perhaps we can hear more about why this issue matters so much to you personally. It was a valiant effort, but neither party seemed ready to back down. Elon straightened up in his chair, regaining some composure. Fine, he said, his tone clipped. We're investing heavily in automation to reduce strain on workers. We're also implementing new safety protocols and increasing wages where needed. But again, perfection isn't realistic. What matters is the bigger picture. Jasmine crossed her arms, her expression unwavering. The bigger picture includes the people making it possible. If you truly care about progress, then you should care about the human cost of achieving it. Otherwise, it's not progress. It's exploitation. The audience erupted into murmurs once more. Some nodded in agreement with Jasmine, while others seemed divided. The debate had struck a nerve, forcing viewers to confront uncomfortable truths about power, responsibility, and the price of innovation. As the segment approached its halfway mark, it was clear that this wasn't going to end quietly. Both Elon and Jasmine were locked in a battle of wills, each determined to have the last word. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every heated glance, every pointed accusation, and every awkward pause. No one knew where this was headed, but one thing was certain. The View had just become must-see TV. The tension in the studio was now at a boiling point. The back and forth between Elon and Jasmine had turned into a verbal tug-of-war, with neither side willing to let go. The audience sat on edge, their eyes darting between the two as if watching a high-stakes tennis match. Every word felt loaded, every pause heavy with unspoken implications. It was clear that this wasn't just about worker conditions anymore. It had become personal. Elon leaned forward again, his jaw tight, his hands gripping the edges of the table. You keep talking about exploitation, he said, his voice rising slightly. But you're ignoring the bigger picture. What we're doing, what my companies are building, is reshaping the future. Do you think any of this would be possible without taking risks? Without pushing boundaries? Jasmine didn't flinch. She met his gaze head-on, her expression calm, but resolute. I'm not denying that your companies are innovative, she replied, her tone measured but firm. But innovation doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's built on the backs of real people, people who deserve respect, fair treatment, and dignity. If you're so focused on the future, why can't you ensure they're taken care of now? The audience murmured again, some nodding in agreement, others shifting uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't just a debate anymore, it was a moral reckoning. For many viewers, it hit close to home. They knew what it was like to work long hours for little pay, to feel undervalued or overlooked. Jasmine's words resonated deeply, striking a chord that went beyond the specifics of Elon's businesses. Elon exhaled sharply, clearly frustrated. He glanced at the other hosts, perhaps hoping for backup, but they remained silent, letting the confrontation play out. Listen, he said, his voice tinged with irritation. You're painting me as some kind of villain, but I'm not the bad guy here. I've poured everything I have into these projects, my time, my energy, my resources. I've risked my own money, my reputation, even my sanity to make them succeed. And yes, mistakes happen along the way. But does that mean I don't care? Of course I care. Jasmine raised an eyebrow, her skepticism plain to see. Caring isn't enough. She shot back. Actions matter more than words. If you truly cared, you'd prioritize transparency. You'd listen to your employees instead of dismissing their concerns. You'd hold yourself accountable when things go wrong. For a moment, Elon looked genuinely stung. His usual confidence faltered, replaced by a flicker of vulnerability. But just as quickly, he masked it with defiance. I'm accountable to my shareholders, to my customers, and to the millions of people who benefit from the work we're doing, he said, his voice firm again. That's where my focus lies, not on baseless accusations or media sensationalism. Baseless, Jasmine repeated, her tone sharp. These aren't baseless accusations, Elon. These are real stories from real people, workers who've spoken out because they felt they had no other choice, families who've suffered because of unsafe conditions or unfair practices. Are you telling me those voices don't matter? The room fell silent. Even the audience seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see how Elon would respond. He hesitated, his usual quick wit deserting him. Instead, he settled for a vague, dismissive gesture. Look, I'm not saying their voices don't matter, he said, his tone softer now, almost defensive. But there's always another side to the story. Context matters. Nuance matters. Jasmine shook her head slowly, as if disappointed, but not surprised. Context and nuance are important, she agreed, but they don't excuse harm. And let's be honest, you haven't exactly been transparent about addressing these issues. In fact, you've often dismissed critics or tried to silence them altogether. Elon's eyes narrowed slightly, his patience wearing thin. Silencing critics? That's ridiculous, he snapped. I welcome criticism if it's constructive, but most of what I hear is noise, people tearing things down without offering solutions. That's not helpful. That's destructive. Jasmine leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. Her expression was calm, but there was a fire in her eyes that hadn't dimmed since the start of the segment. Maybe you wouldn't see so much noise if you actually listened, she countered. If you stopped seeing every critique as an attack and started treating it as feedback. Because here's the thing, Elon. Accountability isn't destruction, it's growth. The audience erupted into murmurs once more, some clapping softly, others whispering heatedly to their neighbors. The exchange had struck a nerve, not just with the live crowd, but with viewers tuning in from home. Social media feeds were already lighting up with reactions, hashtags trending as people weighed in on the clash. Was Jasmine being too harsh? Was Elon dodging responsibility? Everyone had an opinion, and the conversation was spilling far beyond the confines of the studio. Whoopi, sensing the growing intensity, tried to interject again. All right, she said, raising her hands in a placating gesture. Let's take a deep breath here. We're all passionate about these topics, but maybe we can find some common ground. Neither Elon nor Jasmine seemed interested in finding common ground. They were locked in a battle of ideals, each representing a different worldview. For Elon, progress justified the means. For Jasmine, humanity came first. Their clash wasn't just about workplace ethics. It was about values, priorities, and the kind of world they wanted to create. As the segment wore on, the atmosphere grew increasingly charged. Elon's frustration was palpable, his answers becoming shorter and sharper. Jasmine, on the other hand, remained steady, her questions cutting deeper with each passing minute. She wasn't just challenging him on worker conditions anymore. She was questioning his leadership, his integrity, and his vision for the future. Let me ask you something, she said, her tone deliberate, almost piercing. Do you believe that wealth equals power? And if so, do you think that power comes with a responsibility to uplift others, not just through technology, but through fairness and compassion? Elon stared at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a hint of weariness. I believe in using whatever resources I have to drive change, he said, but I can't fix everything. No one person can. All I can do is keep moving forward, keep innovating, and hope that others follow. Jasmine nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. Fair enough, she said. But remember this. True leadership isn't just about moving forward. It's about bringing people with you. And if you leave too many behind, then what's the point of progress? The audience broke into applause, some cheering loudly, others clapping reluctantly. The debate had reached a crescendo, leaving everyone breathless and divided. As the cameras continued to roll, it was clear that this conversation was far from over. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain. The View had just delivered a moment that would be remembered for years to come. The studio felt like it was holding its breath. The clash between Elon and Jasmine had escalated to a point where neither seemed willing to back down, and the audience was caught in the crossfire of their ideological battle. Every word carried weight, every argument resonated deeply, and the tension was so thick you could almost touch it. What started as a discussion about workplace ethics had morphed into something much bigger, a debate about power, responsibility, and the very definition of progress. Elon sat stiffly in his chair, his earlier confidence replaced by a mix of frustration and defensiveness. He glanced at the audience, then back at Jasmine, as if trying to gauge whether he was winning or losing this verbal sparring match. "You talk about fairness and compassion," he said, his voice steady but tinged with irritation. "But you're ignoring the realities of running global companies. There's no perfect solution. Every decision involves trade-offs." Jasmine didn't hesitate to respond. She leaned forward again, her eyes locked on his, her tone firm but calm. "I'm not asking for perfection," she said. "I'm asking for effort, for transparency, for accountability. You're one of the most powerful people in the world, maybe the most powerful, when it comes to shaping technology and industry. With that kind of influence comes a responsibility to lead by example. And right now your example isn't inspiring. It's concerning." The audience murmured in agreement, some nodding vigorously while others exchanged uneasy glances. This wasn't just about Elon anymore. It was about what kind of leaders society needed in an era dominated by tech giants and billionaire entrepreneurs. Jasmine's words struck a chord because they tapped into a broader frustration, a growing sense that those in power often prioritized profits over people. Elon sighed audibly, running a hand through his hair. For a moment he looked tired, as if the weight of the conversation was finally sinking in. But fatigue quickly gave way to defiance. "Let me ask you something," he shot back, leaning forward to match Jasmine's intensity. "Do you think I woke up one day and decided to become the bad guy? Do you think I enjoy being criticized constantly, having my motives questioned, being painted as some sort of villain? I didn't choose this life. It chose me." Jasmine raised an eyebrow, unimpressed by the attempt to shift focus onto his personal struggles. "Nobody's saying you set out to be a villain," she replied, her tone measured but cutting. "But actions speak louder than intentions. And the reality is, your actions, or lack thereof, are affecting real lives. People are suffering because of decisions made under your watch. That's not speculation, that's fact." The room grew quieter, the gravity of her statement hanging in the air. Even the other hosts seemed hesitant to interrupt, sensing that this moment was too important to derail. Whoopi, usually quick with a quip or a lighthearted comment, stayed silent, her expression thoughtful as she watched the exchange unfold. Elon's jaw tightened, and for a brief second, it looked like he might lose his temper entirely. Instead, he took a deep breath, composing himself before speaking again. "Fine," he said, his voice low but forceful. "Let's say I accept some responsibility here, which I do, by the way. Let's say I admit that mistakes have been made. What's your solution? How do you propose we fix these problems without compromising innovation or slowing down progress?" It was a clever move, shifting the burden of proof onto Jasmine. If she couldn't offer concrete solutions, he could frame her criticisms as empty rhetoric. But Jasmine was ready for him. She uncrossed her arms, sitting up straighter as she prepared to deliver her response. "First," she began, her voice clear and deliberate. You need to listen. Really listen. To your employees, to critics, to experts who understand the human cost of rapid industrialization. Second, you need to act. Implement policies that prioritize worker safety and well-being over profit margins. Be transparent about challenges and hold yourself accountable when things go wrong. Third, and this is crucial, you need to stop treating dissent as an attack. Constructive criticism isn't the enemy. It's how we grow. Her answer drew spontaneous applause from parts of the audience. It was direct, actionable, and impossible to dismiss as vague or idealistic. Even some of the other hosts nodded approvingly, clearly impressed by her ability to stay composed under pressure. Elon exhaled sharply, clearly frustrated but unable to counter her points effectively. Instead, he resorted to sarcasm. So basically, he said, his tone dripping with irony, I should just shut down my companies, stop innovating, and spend all my time apologizing for existing. Is that what you're suggesting? Jasmine shook her head, her expression unwavering. No, that's not what I'm suggesting, she replied, her voice sharp enough to cut through his sarcasm. What I'm saying is that innovation doesn't have to come at the expense of humanity. You can push boundaries and still treat people with respect. Progress and compassion aren't mutually exclusive. They're complementary. The audience erupted into applause again, louder this time. Some stood up, cheering enthusiastically while others clapped more cautiously, perhaps still processing the depth of the argument. Social media feeds were ablaze with reactions, memes, and hot takes. Viewers were divided, but they were engaged, and that's exactly what made moments like this unforgettable. Whoopi seized the opportunity to try steering the conversation toward a slightly less combative tone. All right, folks, she said, smiling nervously. Let's take a step back for a moment. Both of you are making valid points here, and I think we can all agree that finding balance is key. Maybe instead of focusing on blame, we can talk about solutions moving forward. It was a valiant effort, but neither Elon nor Jasmine seemed interested in softening their stances. They were locked in a battle of principles, each representing a different vision of leadership and success. For Elon, progress justified sacrifice. For Jasmine, humanity came first. Their clash wasn't just about policy. It was about values, priorities, and the kind of future they wanted to build. As the segment approached its climax, the atmosphere grew even more charged. Elon's frustration was palpable, his answers becoming clipped and defensive. Jasmine, on the other hand, remained calm and focused, her questions hitting harder with each passing minute. She wasn't just challenging him on specific issues anymore. She was questioning his entire philosophy, forcing him to confront uncomfortable truths about his legacy and impact. Let me leave you with this, Jasmine said, her tone softening, slightly but still carrying authority. History remembers leaders not just for what they built, but for how they treated the people who helped them build it. When future generations look back at your work, will they see someone who pushed humanity forward or someone who left too many behind? The question hung in the air unanswered. The audience sat in stunned silence, absorbing the weight of her words. For a moment, it felt like time stood still. Then slowly, the applause began again, rippling through the studio like a wave. Whether they agreed with Jasmine or not, everyone recognized the significance of the moment. This wasn't just television. It was history in the making. The silence in the studio was deafening. Jasmine's final question hung in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and unshakable. The audience, still reeling from the intensity of the exchange, sat frozen, unsure whether to clap, gasp, or simply absorb what had just unfolded. Even the other hosts seemed momentarily paralyzed, their usual cheerful banter replaced by an eerie quiet. All eyes were on Elon, waiting to see how he would respond. Elon stared at Jasmine for what felt like an eternity. His earlier frustration had given way to something deeper, something closer to reflection, though it was hard to tell if he was truly moved or just buying time to craft his next move. Finally he spoke, his voice low but steady. You know, he began, leaning back in his chair. You're asking questions that don't have easy answers. No one gets to decide how history will judge them. All I can do is focus on the work, the mission, and hope that people understand the bigger picture. Jasmine didn't blink. She crossed her arms, her expression thoughtful but unyielding. But isn't that the problem? She countered, her tone softer now but still firm. When you only focus on the bigger picture, you risk losing sight of the details, the people, the lives, the day-to-day realities that make up the foundation of your success. If you don't address those details now, the bigger picture won't matter. The audience murmured again, some nodding in agreement, others whispering nervously among themselves. This wasn't just rhetoric anymore. It was philosophy, ethics, and humanity wrapped into one explosive conversation. For many viewers, this was more than entertainment. It was a reckoning. It forced them to confront uncomfortable truths about power, privilege, and the cost of ambition. Elon shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly struggling to find the right words. He glanced at the audience, then at the other hosts as if searching for support. But none came. Whoopi, Joy, Sunny, and Abby all sat quietly, letting the moment breathe. They knew better than to interrupt. They could sense this was heading toward a breaking point. Finally, Elon leaned forward, his frustration bubbling back to the surface. Look, he said, his voice rising slightly. I'm not here to defend every decision my companies have ever made. Nobody's perfect. But you act like I'm deliberately trying to hurt people, and that's just not true. I'm trying to change the world. For the better. Isn't that worth something? Jasmine tilted her head, studying him intently. There was no malice in her gaze, just a piercing clarity that seemed to cut through his defenses. It's worth a lot, she admitted, her tone softening further. But good intentions aren't enough. Impact matters more than intent. And right now, the impact of your actions is hurting people. People who deserve better. The room fell, silent again, the weight of her words sinking in. Even Elon seemed momentarily speechless, his usual quick wit deserting him. For someone who prided himself on being able to think on his feet, this was unfamiliar territory. He looked down at the table, his fingers drumming nervously against its surface. Whoopi tried once more to steer the conversation toward safer ground. All right, let's take a step back, she said gently, addressing both Elon and Jasmine. We're all passionate about these issues, and that's a good thing, but maybe we can agree that progress requires balance between innovation and responsibility, between ambition and compassion. It was a well-meaning attempt, but neither party seemed ready to embrace compromise. Instead, the tension escalated further when Jasmine decided to push even harder. Elon, she said, her voice calm but pointed, let me ask you one last question. Do you believe that wealth equals power? And if so, do you think that power comes with a duty to uplift others, not just through technology, but through fairness and justice? Elon hesitated, caught off guard by the directness of her query. He opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, clearly grappling with how to frame his answer. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a hint of weariness. I believe that wealth gives you the ability to create change, he said slowly. But I don't think anyone owes the world anything. We're all just doing the best we can. Jasmine shook her head, her expression a mix of disappointment and determination. That's where we disagree, she replied. With great power comes great responsibility. You can't reshape industries, redefine economies, and claim to be changing the world without owning the consequences of your actions. That's not leadership. That's escapism. The audience erupted into murmurs yet again, some clapping softly, others whispering heatedly to their neighbors. The debate had struck a nerve, forcing viewers to confront uncomfortable truths about accountability and morality. Social media feeds were ablaze, hashtags trending as people weighed in on the clash. Was Jasmine being too harsh? Was Elon dodging responsibility? Everyone had an opinion, and the conversation was spilling far beyond the confines of the studio. For Elon, the pressure was mounting. His earlier confidence had completely evaporated, replaced by a growing sense of unease. He glanced at the clock, then at the producers, perhaps wondering how much longer this segment would last. But before he could gather his thoughts, Jasmine delivered one final blow. "You talk about changing the world," she said, her voice firm but tinged with empathy. "But real change starts with humility. It starts with recognizing that you're not infallible, that you don't have all the answers. Until you're willing to admit that and act on it, you'll always be seen as part of the problem, not the solution." The audience broke into applause, louder and more sustained than before. Some stood up, cheering enthusiastically, while others clapped reluctantly, still processing the depth of the argument. For many, Jasmine's words resonated deeply because they reflected a broader frustration, a growing demand for leaders who prioritize humanity over profit, compassion over convenience. Elon exhaled sharply, visibly shaken. He looked around the room, then back at Jasmine, his jaw tight. For a brief moment, it seemed like he might walk off the set altogether. Instead, he forced a smile, though it didn't reach his eyes. "Well," he said dryly, "this has been enlightening." Jasmine returned his gaze, her expression unreadable. "I hope so," she replied simply, "because the world is watching." The cameras kept rolling as the segment drew to a close, capturing every nuance of the charged atmosphere. Whatever happened next, one thing was certain. The View had just delivered a moment that would be remembered for years to come. The clock on the studio wall ticked audibly, each second stretching longer than the last. The tension in the room had reached a fever pitch, and it was clear that this wasn't just another talk show segment. It was a defining moment. Elon sat rigidly in his chair, his face a mix of frustration and thinly veiled anger. Jasmine, on the other hand, remained composed, her expression calm but resolute. She had thrown everything she had at him, and now it felt like the entire audience was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Elon finally broke the silence, his voice sharp and clipped. "You know," he said, leaning forward with an intensity that made the microphone crackle slightly, "this feels less like a conversation and more like a trial. I came here to discuss innovation, progress, and solutions, not to be lectured about things you clearly don't understand." Jasmine raised an eyebrow, unfazed by his tone. "A trial?" she repeated, her voice steady. "Is that how you see accountability, as some kind of personal attack? Because if it is, maybe that's part of the problem." The audience murmured again, their reactions split. Some nodded along with Jasmine, agreeing that accountability shouldn't feel like persecution. Others seemed sympathetic to Elon, wondering if the criticism was too harsh. The divide was palpable both in the studio and among viewers watching from home. Social media was ablaze, with hashtags like Diner Accountability Matters and Irvine Leadership Under Fire trending as people debated who was right and who was wrong. Whoopi, sensing the growing hostility, tried one last time to mediate. "All right, let's try to bring this back to a place of understanding," she said, her voice warm but firm. "We're all passionate about these issues, and that's important, but maybe we can focus on finding common ground instead of pointing fingers." Elon sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. He looked at Whoopi, then at the audience, as if weighing whether to stay or walk away. Finally, he spoke, his voice tinged with irritation. "Common ground sounds nice in theory," he said, "but when someone keeps accusing me of being unethical or irresponsible without acknowledging the complexity of what I'm trying to achieve, it's hard to find any middle ground." Jasmine didn't hesitate to respond. "Acknowledging complexity doesn't mean excusing harm," she shot back. "Yes, your work is complicated. Yes, there are challenges, but none of that absolves you of responsibility for the consequences of your actions. You can't hide behind complexity forever." The audience erupted into murmurs yet again, some clapping softly, while others whispered nervously. The energy in the room was electric, charged with emotion and divided opinions. For many, this wasn't just about Elon Musk anymore. It was about larger questions of power, ethics, and leadership. Should billionaires be held accountable for systemic issues? Can progress coexist with fairness? These were the unspoken questions lingering in the air. Elon leaned back in his chair, visibly frustrated. His usual confidence had been replaced by a simmering anger, and it showed in the way he gripped the arms of his seat. "You keep talking about consequences," he said, his voice rising slightly. "But what about the consequences of slowing down progress? What about the millions of people who benefit from the innovations my companies create? Do their voices not matter?" Jasmine tilted her head, her expression thoughtful but unwavering. "Of course they matter," she replied. "But so do the voices of those who suffer because of the decisions made along the way. Progress isn't a zero-sum game, Elon. You can innovate and still treat people with dignity. It's not either or, it's both and." Her words drew spontaneous applause from parts of the audience. Some stood up, cheering enthusiastically, while others clapped reluctantly, still processing the depth of the argument. Even the other hosts exchanged glances, clearly impressed by Jasmine's ability to remain composed under pressure. This wasn't just a debate. It was a masterclass in standing up for principles without losing sight of humanity. For a moment, it seemed like Elon might concede a point. He exhaled sharply, his shoulders slumping slightly as if the weight of the conversation was finally sinking in. But just as quickly, his frustration returned, sharper and more pointed. "You know what?" he snapped, his voice louder now. "I've had enough of this. If you're only interested in tearing me down instead of having a meaningful discussion, then I'm done." Before anyone could react, Elon stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. The sound echoed through the studio, startling the audience into silence. Everyone watched in stunned disbelief as he turned to the producers, his face flushed with anger. "Kick her off the show if you value integrity," he said, pointing directly at Jasmine. "This isn't journalism. It's a witch hunt." The room erupted into chaos. Gasps filled the air as the audience realized what was happening. Some people shouted objections, others cheered in support of Elon's decision, while a few simply sat frozen, unsure how to process the sudden turn of events. The other hosts scrambled to regain control, their expressions a mix of shock and concern. Jasmine, however, didn't flinch. She remained seated, her expression calm but defiant. When the producers hesitated, unsure whether to intervene, she leaned forward slightly and addressed Elon directly. "Go ahead," she said, her voice steady and clear. "Walk away if that's what you need to do, but know this, you can't silence the truth. Accountability isn't something you can escape, no matter how powerful you are." The cameras kept rolling as the scene unfolded, capturing every nuance of the dramatic moment. For a brief second, it felt like time stood still. Then, slowly, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. Elon stormed off the set, his departure met with a mix of boos and cheers from the audience. Jasmine sat quietly, her composure unshaken as the other hosts tried to piece together what to say next. Whoopi took a deep breath, clearly shaken by the turn of events. "Well," she said, forcing a smile, "that was intense. Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll reflect on what just happened." As the show cut to commercial, the audience buzzed with excitement and disbelief. Social media feeds exploded with reactions, memes, and hot takes. Viewers were divided, but they were engaged. And that's exactly what made moments like this unforgettable. Whether they agreed with Jasmine or sympathized with Elon, everyone recognized the significance of the moment. This wasn't just television, it was history in the making. The studio lights dimmed slightly as the show returned from commercial break, but the energy in the room was anything but subdued. The audience was still buzzing, their emotions raw and divided. Some clapped enthusiastically for Jasmine, while others muttered under their breath about Elon's abrupt exit. The tension was palpable, like an invisible thread pulling everyone deeper into the drama that had just unfolded. Whoopi took a deep breath, clearly aware of the enormity of the moment. She adjusted her microphone and leaned forward, her expression a mix of professionalism and genuine concern. "All right, folks," she began, her voice calm but tinged with unease. "We're back. And I think it's safe to say that what just happened will be talked about for a long time." The other hosts nodded slowly, their usual banter replaced by a rare seriousness. Joy glanced at the empty chair where Elon had been sitting moments earlier, then turned to Sunny and Abby, silently asking, "What do we even say now?" It was clear they were all navigating uncharted territory. This wasn't just another heated debate. It was a cultural moment, one that blurred the lines between entertainment, ethics, and accountability. Jasmine sat quietly in her seat, her posture relaxed but her eyes sharp and focused. She didn't look triumphant or defeated. Instead, she carried an air of quiet resolve, as if she knew this confrontation was inevitable. When Whoopi turned to her, inviting her to share her thoughts, Jasmine leaned forward slightly, her tone measured, but firm. "I didn't come here looking for a fight," she said, addressing both the hosts and the audience. "I came here to ask questions, important questions, that deserve answers. Accountability isn't about tearing someone down. It's about holding people in power responsible for the impact of their actions. If that makes some people uncomfortable, then so be it." Her words drew mixed reactions from the crowd. Some applauded loudly, clearly moved by her conviction, while others remained silent, perhaps still processing the intensity of the exchange. Social media feeds continued to explode, with viewers weighing in on every angle of the incident. Memes flooded timelines, opinion pieces were already being written, and hashtags like "Elon walks out" and "Jasmine stands firm" dominated platforms worldwide. Meanwhile, Elon's sudden departure had sparked its own wave of reactions. Clips of his dramatic exit were shared millions of times within minutes, accompanied by captions ranging from supportive, "Good for him, he doesn't need this negativity," to critical, "Classic billionaire move, walk away when things get tough." Pundits debated whether his decision to leave mid-interview showed strength or weakness, while late-night comedians scrambled to write jokes about the incident. Back in the studio, the conversation shifted toward reflection. Whoopi turned to the other hosts, asking them to weigh in. "What did you all think of what just happened?" she asked, her tone gentle but probing. Joy was the first to respond, her voice thoughtful. "I think it's complicated," she admitted. On one hand, Jasmine raises valid points about accountability and responsibility. On the other hand, Elon has achieved incredible things, and it's hard not to admire his vision. But maybe the real issue is finding balance. How do we celebrate innovation without ignoring the human cost? Sunny nodded, adding her perspective. Exactly. And let's not forget, this isn't just about Elon. It's about a system that often prioritizes profit over people. Whether you agree with Jasmine or sympathize with Elon, the bigger question is how we hold leaders accountable without stifling progress. Abby chimed in next, her tone more empathetic. At the end of the day, both sides have a point. Jasmine's questions were tough, but they needed to be asked. And Elon's frustration is understandable. He's under constant scrutiny. But walking off set, that sends a message too. It says, "I'm done engaging," and I'm not sure that helps anyone. The audience murmured in agreement, their reactions reflecting the same divide seen across social media. For many, this moment felt personal. It forced them to confront uncomfortable truths about power dynamics, privilege, and the price of ambition. Was it fair to expect billionaires to shoulder the burden of societal change? Or was it naive to believe progress could happen without sacrifice? As the discussion continued, Jasmine remained the focal point. Her composure and clarity had left a lasting impression, and Whoopi turned to her once again. "Jasmine," she said gently, "what's going through your mind right now? How are you feeling after everything that just happened?" Jasmine paused for a moment, collecting her thoughts before responding. "Honestly," she said, her voice soft but steady, "I feel proud. Not because of my role in this, but because of the larger conversation it's sparking. People are talking about accountability, about fairness, about what kind of leaders we want shaping our future. Those are important conversations, and they need to happen more often." She paused, glancing briefly at the empty chair where Elon had sat. "Look," she continued, her tone firming up, "I don't hate Elon Musk. I respect his achievements and I believe he genuinely wants to make the world better. But good intentions aren't enough. Impact matters more than intent. And until we start holding powerful figures accountable, not just Elon, but all of them, we won't see real change. Her words resonated deeply, drawing applause from parts of the audience. Even those who disagreed with her couldn't deny the sincerity behind her message. It wasn't just about criticizing Elon. It was about challenging a culture that often celebrated success without questioning its cost. As the segment neared its conclusion, Whoopi summed up the mood perfectly. "This has been a lot," she admitted with a wry smile. "And I think we can all agree that today's episode will go down in history. Love it or hate it, it's forcing us to think critically about leadership, responsibility, and the kind of future we want to build." The audience erupted into applause. Their cheers mingled with lingering murmurs of debate. The show wrapped up shortly after, but the ripple effects of the clash were far from over. By the time the credits rolled, news outlets were already reporting on the incident, framing it as a defining moment in modern discourse. Late-night hosts joked about Elon's dramatic exit, political commentators dissected Jasmine's arguments, and everyday viewers shared their thoughts online, turning the event into a global conversation. For Jasmine, the aftermath was equally intense. Within hours, she appeared on another network, doubling down on her stance and accusing Elon of being unable or unwilling to handle tough questions. Her interview went viral, further amplifying her message and solidifying her reputation as a fearless advocate for accountability. Elon, on the other hand, retreated from public view for a short while. When he eventually resurfaced, he addressed the incident briefly on social media, calling it a misunderstanding and accusing Jasmine of having a biased agenda. His response only fueled the fire, reigniting debates about free speech, criticism, and the responsibilities of public figures. In the days that followed, the fallout continued to unfold. Ratings for The View skyrocketed, turning the incident into a cultural phenomenon. Fans praised Jasmine for standing her ground, while critics accused her of crossing a line. Meanwhile, Elon's defenders argued that no one should have to endure such harsh scrutiny, while his detractors saw his reaction as proof of his inability to accept accountability. Through it all, one thing was certain. The clash between Elon Musk and Jasmine Crockett had become more than just a tabloid headline. It was a reflection of our times, a moment that forced society to grapple with complex questions about power, ethics, and humanity. Whether viewed as a victory for accountability or a cautionary tale about cancel culture, it left an indelible mark on the collective consciousness, ensuring that the conversation would continue long after the cameras stopped rolling. The days following the explosive episode of The View felt like a whirlwind for everyone involved. The world couldn't stop talking about what had happened, and every corner of media, from cable news to social platforms, was dissecting the clash between Elon and Jasmine. It wasn't just a story anymore. It was a cultural moment that exposed deeper societal tensions. People weren't just debating who was right or wrong. They were reflecting on broader questions about power, accountability, and how we navigate conflicting values in an increasingly complex world. For Jasmine, life changed almost overnight. Her name became synonymous with courage and conviction. Supporters hailed her as a voice of reason, someone willing to challenge even the most powerful figures without backing down. Critics, however, accused her of being too harsh, claiming she had crossed a line by pushing Elon to the point of walking off the set. But regardless of where people stood, no one could deny the impact she'd made. She became a household name, invited to speak on countless shows, podcasts, and panels. Her message, that accountability matters, especially for those in positions of immense influence, resonated deeply with many. During one follow-up interview, Jasmine addressed the backlash head-on. Sitting across from a late-night host known for his sharp wit, she spoke candidly about the incident. "I didn't wake up that morning thinking I'd be part of a viral moment," she admitted, smiling faintly. "But here's the thing. Accountability isn't supposed to be comfortable. If it were easy, everyone would do it. My job isn't to make people feel good. It's to ask tough questions and hold them to the standards they claim to believe in." Her words struck a chord with viewers, particularly those frustrated by the growing gap between rhetoric and reality among leaders. Many saw her as a symbol of resistance against unchecked power, while others viewed her as overly confrontational. Either way, she embraced the attention not for herself, but for the larger conversation she hoped to spark. "This isn't about me," she said firmly. "It's about creating a world where progress doesn't come at the expense of humanity. We can innovate and still treat people fairly. It's not an either-or situation." Elon, meanwhile, took a different approach. After disappearing briefly from public view, he re-emerged on social media, posting cryptic messages that hinted at his frustration. In one tweet, he called the entire incident a misunderstanding and accused Jasmine of having a hidden agenda. "Some people thrive on negativity," he wrote. "They aren't interested in solutions. They just want to tear things down." The post quickly went viral, sparking heated debates among his millions of followers. Some rallied behind him, praising him for standing up to unfair criticism. Others saw his response as evasive, arguing that he should have addressed the concerns directly instead of dismissing them outright. In another statement, Elon doubled down on his belief that progress requires sacrifice. "You can't please everyone," he wrote. "If you wait for perfection, nothing gets done. Sometimes moving forward means making hard choices. That's the price of innovation." While some agreed with this sentiment, others pointed out that innovation shouldn't come at the cost of basic human dignity. The back and forth continued online, turning into a digital tug-of-war that reflected the same ideological divide seen during the original confrontation. Despite their opposing views, both Jasmine and Elon seemed to recognize the significance of what had transpired. For Jasmine, it reinforced the importance of asking tough questions, even when doing so came with risks. For Elon, it served as a reminder of the intense scrutiny that comes with being in the public eye, and perhaps a lesson in choosing battles wisely. Neither apologized publicly, but there were subtle signs that they had gained something from the experience. Jasmine later reflected on the incident in an op-ed for a major newspaper. Writing with clarity and humility, she acknowledged the challenges of holding powerful figures accountable. "It's not easy to stand up to someone like Elon Musk," she wrote. "He represents ambition, innovation, and a vision for the future that inspires millions. But inspiration alone isn't enough. True leadership means listening to criticism, learning from mistakes, and ensuring that progress benefits everyone, not just a select few." Elon, too, seemed to soften slightly in subsequent interviews. While he maintained his stance on the necessity of risk-taking and bold decision-making, he also expressed a willingness to engage more openly with critics. "Maybe I could have handled things differently," he admitted during a podcast appearance. "But I'm passionate about what I do, and sometimes that passion clouds my judgment. I'll always welcome constructive feedback. It's how we grow." The aftermath of the clash extended far beyond the two individuals involved. It sparked meaningful conversations about ethics, responsibility, and the role of public figures in shaping society. Educators used the incident as a case study in classrooms, discussing the balance between ambition and compassion. Journalists explored the complexities of accountability in an era dominated by tech giants and billionaire entrepreneurs. Even casual viewers found themselves reflecting on their own beliefs about success, fairness, and the kind of future they wanted to build for the view. The episode marked a turning point. Ratings soared to unprecedented levels, and the show became a focal point for discussions about free speech, journalism, and the responsibilities of hosting controversial figures. Whoopi and the other hosts navigated the fallout with grace, emphasizing the importance of open dialogue, even when it led to uncomfortable moments. "We're here to facilitate conversations, not shy away from them," Whoopi said during a later episode. "Yes, it got heated. Yes, it was messy. But isn't that what real progress looks like? Messy, imperfect, and full of difficult truths?" As time passed, the initial shock of the incident began to fade, but its lessons lingered. Both Jasmine and Elon emerged from the experience with new perspectives and new challenges. For Jasmine, it solidified her reputation as a fearless advocate for accountability, inspiring others to speak truth to power. For Elon, it served as a reminder of the weight of his influence and the expectations placed upon him as a leader. Ultimately, the clash transcended its immediate context, becoming a reflection of our times. It highlighted the complexities of modern discourse, where differing perspectives often collide in unpredictable ways. Though divisive, it forced people to confront uncomfortable truths about ethics, responsibility, and the human cost of progress. And in doing so, it left an indelible mark on the collective consciousness, a reminder that the most important conversations are rarely easy, but always necessary.